Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We're grateful to have all of you with us today for this wonderful occasion, the Warren Dennis Metro Urban Lecture Series. And we're grateful for our professor of urban ministry, Dr. McLean-Farrell, being with us, and we're going to hear from her shortly. But we're also grateful that we have the former professor of urban ministry with us, Dr. Warren Dennis. We have Dr. Bill Levering with us, one of our respondents. And we will hopefully have Reverend Dr. Patricia Seeley arriving as we go forward with this afternoon's event. But it's great to see all of you here for this opportunity for us to focus on doing urban ministry or ministry in the urban context. Would you just bow your head in a word of prayer? O gracious and loving God, creator of all the universe, we ask for your blessings upon our time together. You've called us together to do this work. It's a work that continues to present obstacles, but there are opportunities for us to grow and learn and do. As we seek to continue your work of reconciliation, be with us and bless us, bless our work and all that we say and do. We ask this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. At this time, it's an honor and pleasure to introduce our president of our seminary, Dr. Micah McCreary, and he's going to come at this time.
Thank you, Professor Smith. It's good to see each of you here, and I welcome you again to this place. Over the 18-plus months I've been president, kind of the theme, if you can look up, those who don't mind lights, that our theme is a light in God's cities. And we're looking at that, and what we do here is to help people think critically, act justly, and lead faithfully. And so in doing that, one of the things that I am honored to do as the president is to really not just mentor, but to bring in awesome faculty. Without faculty members who can really teach and present and research and write and go into the community and do community endeavors that are critical to what we want to be as a seminary, the mission's over. And Warren Dennis is one of those persons, so I want to acknowledge him and his presence here. Thank God for that. I shared with him when I first got here, I was just walking around the facility, and they were pointing out that there are now park benches outside in the lawn, and that the benches were actually placed there in honor for the way in which he would teach. He would just sit. Those of you all know him, you can just nod your heads. You just sit with people and grow them. And even today, I was just sitting near him, and a past student came in, and he said, I want to talk to you. I was just having lunch with this other student over here who had this idea, and she's working on a project similar to yours. You're not in the same place, you're not doing the same degree, but a conversation between the two of you all would be fruitful. And when you think of that, that's who he is. And so today, in a sense, we pass the mantle from who he was to a wonderful new colleague at New Brunswick Theological Seminary, Dr. Janice McLean-Farrell. Her bio is extensive, and I encourage you to take some time to read it. But she'll be installed today as the Dirk Romeyn Assistant Professor of Metro Urban Ministry, which is what Dr. Dennis was. Her current research interest and her current focus is on religions of the African diaspora, Christianity in the Caribbean, urban immigrant youth and religion and how they use race and music and social engagement, marriage and sexuality among Black immigrant youth in New York, and it goes on. I'm proud to say that it had nothing to do with it, but she received her Bachelor's of Arts in Chemistry from the University of Delaware, a Master's of Divinity from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, a Master's of Theology from Princeton Theological Seminary, and a Ph.D. in Divinity from the University of Edinburgh. Somebody ought to give her a hand of praise for that right there. And I'm doing this because there's sometimes this myth that when you've got a woman, and even a woman of color, that she's not qualified, that she somehow got the position because it was given to her. Catch up with me when you get time. So I want to talk about her appointments before coming to New Brunswick. She was a faculty member since 2009 at City Seminary in New York City. She was a visiting lecturer at the Westminster Theological Seminary. She was also the Ph.D. committee member and an examiner for Ph.D. comprehensive exams at Fuller Theological Seminary, and developed several May sessions at Calvin Theological Seminary in Grand Rapids. Her editorial and administrative appointments are that she was a coordinator for a non-degree program at City Seminary. She was the overseer of all of the non-degree programs there. She was a coordinator of the Global New York Church Project, and she was the research administrator of that successful grant. She's a co-director of the Next Generation Research Project. She's the creator of the seminary's policies and procedures on conducting research and human subjects. She organized select sites and led the annual seminary-wide community prayer event called Pray and Break Bread, and it goes on. Some of the publications. She's already written her first book, which is West Indian Pentecostals, Living Their Faith in New York and London. She's been a member of an edited volume, a book that was edited. She's one of the editors of Understanding World Christianity, and that book received 2 awards, the International Bulletin of Missionary Research Outstanding Books in 2011, and the 2012 Catholic Book Award as well. She's also been the editor of another book, Engaging the World, Christian Communities in Contemporary Contexts. Peer-reviewed, about 9 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters that she has written. One I really liked was Making a Joyful Noise unto the Lord, the music and song within Pentecostal West Indian immigrant religious communities in the diaspora. And it goes on and on and on. Publication in progress. She's writing one now on Waiting for the Right One. She's also dealing with African Indians and the history of the Caribbean experience with Christianity. And I'm proud to say she just returned from the Proctor Conference, which is one of the major conferences in our venue and milieu, and we did a paper presentation there on, what's it on?
Afrophobia and mass incarceration.
Mass incarceration and some other words that I, as well. And so, and that's good. So, and other fellowships, other awards that are there. I just want to really put it out that New Brunswick Theological Seminary has some weight in its faculty. Amen? Amen. Give God a praise. I present you now Dr. Janice McLean-Farrell.
Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the city as classroom, emerging pedagogies in urban ministry. So this talk essentially came out of a class I'm teaching this semester called Introduction to Urban Ministry. And by the time I constructed the class, Beth, the dean, had already told me that I would be giving the Warren Dennis lecture. So I said, in order to make less work for myself, I will structure the lecture after my class. And so basically, the things I'm going to be talking about today comes out of my interrogation of what are some of the things that faculty members need to do if we're going to adequately prepare people to minister in urbanized spaces, which actually is not the future of our world, but it is the current world. So if you're not engaging with cities or urbanized spaces, begin to do so, because that will be where our ministry context will be in the future. So urban ministry finds its fullest meaning within the context of Metropolitan Ministry. That is, we're in like the Metropolitan New York City. a vision and practice that considers and engages a myriad of systems that impact life in an ever-changing and increasingly urban world. Today's urban context is, so one of the things I'm talking to my students about is that you cannot just deal with the local. It is local, national, global. You have to engage on all of these levels simultaneously. So these contexts are diverse, complex, pluralistic, entrepreneurial, innovative, trendsetting, and growing. So needless to say, there's a lot going on in our cities, and we need to be aware of all of these levels. So ministries and social agencies within urban contexts and programs in urban ministry need to make the city their classroom. That is, to know the cultures and environments around them, interrogate their interrelations and relationships with the communities they serve, and affirm the multi-religious and multicultural dynamics that shape these communities and those around the world. So the question that I'll engage with this afternoon is, how do urban pastors, practitioners, and social agencies develop a vision and daily practice that are contextually relevant, culturally competent, historically grounded, pastoral in nature, faithful to Scripture, global in outlook, and prophetic in witness? And so basically this lecture I'll give you some of my thoughts on how we do this. So I have a bunch of preliminaries here. I'm not going to spend time on them. The preliminaries have to do with adult education. The way adults learn is not the same as an 18-year-old. And so in our practice of doing theological education, if our learners, our students are adults, there are certain things we need to put into place. So if you want to know those things, talk to me about that afterwards. I'm going to just jump right into the meat of why we are here. So in terms of biblical framing, how do you have the city as classroom? I'm going to talk about 4 or 5 things today. The first is biblical framing. In considering the topic before us today, the city as classroom, emerging pedagogies in urban ministry, I said that before. I use my current urban ministry course, so I can skip over that. So when you take a brief review of some urban ministry texts, be it Urban Ministry by Harvey and Kahn, City of God, City and Satan by Lithicum, Urban Ministry and Introduction by Peters, these books or texts provide a glimpse into the nature and scope of cities in the scriptures and the manner in which they serve to foster or inhibit God's work of salvation in the lives of the children of Israel and the nations around them. While such framing is necessary and foundational, as I construct a biblical framework of the city and urban ministry, I acknowledge that there is one question and several assumptions that need to be interrogated. The question is, who is my neighbor? So you're in these urbanized spaces where you have pluralism, you have all these multi-levels of interactions. That question remains a significant one. Who is your neighbor? Who is the other? Who is the marginalized? Who is our 21st century Samaritan? And how will we interact with the others? Then there's also the assumptions about our faith. It is to have boldness to lift up the edges of the proverbial rug and look with honesty at what lies beneath. It is to see the lies that bind us, the truth that frees us, the ways in which the scriptures in their propagation have been used by people to kill, oppress, destroy, as well as to heal, give life, and set free. It is to reassess our Christian heritage and history, and it is to deal honestly with the myths that we call truths and the truths that we now call lies. So for myself as a Jamaican American, my foundational place of engagement as far as the scriptures begins in 1492. It is to interrogate the way in which a certain construction of God was seen as giving license to the conquest, as articulated by Pope Alexander VI papal bull, when he essentially gave to Spain the dominions. Here's the quote: the dominions, cities, camps, places and villages, and all rights, jurisdictions, and all islands and mainlands found and to be found, discovered and to be discovered, both toward the west and the south. So essentially, it didn't matter if Spain, their feet touch ground or not. The reality is, they saw it as their God-given right to take rights or to take ownership of this place. So as discoverer, Spain had the legal, theological, and ontological rights over lands and peoples. In this transaction, however, it is to note how God's image in the other was marred and robbed of personhood and rendered voiceless, unable to advocate for itself. It is also to note the colonial process. If you're a good Jamaican or good West Indian, you have been steeped in the colonial process. And how the embodiment of that process sought to make the colonial power into the image of God. When one's personhood could only be defined based on how close it came to a standard of whiteness and the standard's articulation of God and faith. It is to speak of the manner in which this embodiment continues to live on in contemporary faith practices, where the once colonized continue to perpetuate on their fellow citizens the brutal heritage from which we have come: killing, making dumb, and destroying. It is also to call attention to the subversive power of the Spirit, of God's Spirit, in bringing life to the dead and causing once dry bones to now stand as a mighty army. It is a calling for and a working towards the justice and freedom of all people. So for myself, as a Jamaican American, it is a process of unlearning and relearning, of paying attention to the hermeneutic lens, that is the window through which I view those scriptures. God, myself, and other people, especially the other. The one who is at the margin, the powerless. And for myself, when I pull on my heritage, I pull on one of the national heroes of Jamaica, Sam Sharp, the slave who fought for freedom. It wasn't a successful rebellion, but it became it essentially became the straw that broke the back of slavery throughout the British Empire. It is to call on the Afro-Christian religions in Jamaica and the way it found a way to uplift black people. So you didn't have to just be British to be Christian or European to be Christian. You could be black and Christian as well. It is to embrace Rastafari. Bob Marley isn't just the one we celebrate because he's this, bigger than life person. But to listen to the lyrics that emanate from Rastafari and ask ourselves, how does that help us to emancipate ourselves? No. And what is the repercussions or the consequences of such emancipation? It is to think about how the gospel is and continues to be good news to all people, where shalom or wholeness is more than an ideal, but it is a lived reality. So with each of these, I will give you my reflections, and then I'll talk about an activity in terms of how do we engage the city as a classroom. So the activity around biblical framing is learning to love and appreciate the city. I'll be honest, I am a country Jamaican girl. I grew up in rural Jamaica, so my ideal sleeping conditions is pitch black and quiet. I now live in Harlem, so pitch black and quiet will never be my reality. And so depending on where your place of home is, we have different types of relationship with the cities. Either we love the city or we hate the city. And we might be in the city doing ministry, but it doesn't necessarily mean we appreciate where we are. It's like either the friend or the relative that when they come at Thanksgiving, you put up with them because that's what you do for Thanksgiving. And so it's very hard to do ministry from that context. It's like pulling the proverbial teeth. And so how do we learn to love the city? And here's what I offer to you. Choose a neighborhood or area in your city that you want to interact. Walk the place, go visit. Walk the blocks, use your senses, immerse yourself in the place. Pay attention to the feelings. If it is anger or ambivalence, note those things. But in the process, begin to pray about those things and bring that place and those feelings to the Lord. Return several times. It's like, think about, for those of you who are married, when you were dating your significant other, there might have been a couple things about them that you didn't like. But over time, as you got to know them, those things began to change. Do the same with the city. Or not. Or not, that's reality. But learn to love this place. Because the reality is you're not just there by happenstance or coincidence. God has placed you there, and your ministry is of value there. So the second thing I want to talk about is naming one of the elephants in the room: the construction of race and its impact on the people of African descent. Quote, in 2013, the United Nations established the International Decade for the People of African Descent to provide a framework in which the United Nations, member states, civil societies, and other relevant actors can work with people identified as Black to identify and address problems of recognition, justice, and development. But we also need to admit that while the United Nations may have come up with this decade of African people, our reality is far from what it is. Because what is challenging in regards to race issues, however, is that much of what facilitates it is unconscious. It's built into the very fabric of a society that one is not expected to question. On the other hand, the insidious nature of its construction shapes all areas of life. And as such, any adequate interrogation of the topic and the true nature of the lives of people of color requires the engagement of multiple levels: the macro, the local, the national, the global, various disciplines: theological, biblical, history, politics, science, sociology, economy, etc., and the incorporation of diverse perspectives, especially by those who have been relegated to the margins by those in power. For the sake of time, my engagement will be limited. I have here two constructions: the England identity and the American one. But I think what I'm going to do is I'll talk a little bit about the English identity, and then quickly fast forward to the American one. So England's identity as a nation developed during the medieval period and centered on the unification of the kingdom. Instrumental in this process was the forging of an Anglo-Saxon heritage harkening back to the Germanic tribes written about by the Roman historian Tacitus in 98 CE. He describes this group of people as a distinct, unmixed race with fierce blue eyes, red hair, and huge frames. They do not laugh at vice, have good moral habits, and good laws. According to Kelly Brown Douglas, the English, quote, believed that these tribes were their Anglo-Saxon ancestors. Fueled with this understanding of their ancestral lineage, the early English reformers were intent on restoring the English church and society to their free Anglo-Saxon past. So like other European countries at the time, England's identity also had ethnic implications. To be English was to be a certain type of people, a godly, moral, civilized white race. Therefore, it is no surprise that by the 18th century, British and English were interchangeable. the ethnic associations, that is, the whiteness embedded in it. With the Anglo-Saxon heritage around whiteness at its core, every other ethnicity was deemed deficient. For England, the superiority of her people had exerted profound effect on the bodies of the Africans and other colonized people. The superiority of the race was to be maintained at all costs. It formed the bedrock of colonization, the foundation of the society, a tenet of Christianity, and a way of life for all people, both the oppressed and the oppressor. Another dynamic that was at play in Europe was the very construction of purity. Was over against the lack of such by other Europeans. Thus, embedded in each country's articulation of quote-unquote nationality was a representation of themselves and their particular embodiment of quote pure blood, virtue, ancestry, and faith. As Kelly Brown Douglas shows in the book Stand Your Ground, America's conceptualization of her Anglo-Saxon identity was framed in opposition to that of England, and the manner in which England had betrayed its Anglo-Saxon roots. Thus, while England was seen to have reneged on its history, America saw herself as the one who would embrace her chosen destiny, the manifest destiny as it will be articulated later on, as the true Anglo descendants and have it shape all of life. Foundational in this construction was the myth of Anglo-Saxon exceptionalism. That is, to be Anglo-Saxon is to be gifted, to have morality and freedom in their blood, basically within your very genetic material. To it was added the ethnic assignment of whiteness as cherished property. That means this is something to hold as precious, and you protect it at all cost. Additional justification for the subjugation of non-white peoples came from a particularized interpretation of the curse of Ham, as well as various pseudoscientific philosophical approaches. According to Samuel Yoruba, quote, the doctrine of inherent black inferiority, which informed the ideology of racism, served several purposes. First, it provided moral justification for the acts of bestiality and prevented any possible indignation that may come from the European context. So if they are deemed theologically to be slaves, then they're less than human. So I can do whatever to them, and nobody in Europe, no moral, righteous, upstanding person in Europe will look at you and deem you brutal or deem you unethical. Second, it soothed any vestige of conscience that the slave traders and colonists might have possessed by enabling them to reconcile their cultural values with their brutal activities. Third, by undermining the self-esteem of the black person, this doctrine sought to prevent any resistance from the enslaved and colonized, while simultaneously trying to convince him and her of the superiority of the white man and his right to rule. So these types of identification gets lived out in Britain's colonial systems that they wreck on the majority of the world, and it becomes the foundation for the whole ideology of manifest destiny that guides the way America interacts with the rest of the world. So how does this play out? It is seen in the very systems, structures, and laws, the subtle and the explicit, in the US and across the globe that works to oppress, terrorize, annihilate, silence, deem them worthless, and contain non-white peoples, and I would say bodies. In our metro-urban context, it is seen in the construction of blue privilege, mass incarceration, mass criminalization, substandard public housing and education, the cradle to prison or grave pipeline, food deserts, and inadequate health services, to name a few. All of these have their origins in and pivot on the law of the land. So I've just covered a whole lot in this about this elephant in the room. So how do we uncover this? How do we engage the city? What I put forward here is go back to that place that you were just in before and look and see what's there. What's the dynamics of race and ethnicity in that physical space? What are the types of residents? Is it a commercial? You know, how does that physical space feel? And the reason why this activity has you go into a space is because when we have conversations about race, it can be very abstract, very, high level, talking about what identities and how these things play out. But if we are honest, they play out on bodies, on lungs, on stomachs, in neighborhoods and cities across our country. So it is not enough to just engage on an abstract theoretical level. Our engagement has to touch ground. So the third area that I want us to consider is migration and pluralism. So mobility and migration has been a part of human society from the very beginning. What we see, though, in contemporary times, the discussions about the reasons why people leave, especially in the public sphere, has at times taken on a pernicious tone. Within xenophobia framings of migration, the migration phenomena, the people who move are often classified as criminals. Underdeveloped sending countries are labeled deficient or worse, and thus unable to provide for its citizens, and the resource-rich receiving countries are positioned as needing to protect their borders, culture, nationhood, identity from those who will exploit these resources by becoming increasingly fortress-like. I'm sure some of this language sounds familiar. This particular framing of migration, the phenomenon of migration, gives very little room to uncovering the policies, that is, the policies that are rooted in historical, economic, political, spiritual, socio-cultural, etc., that continue to drive migration nationally and globally, or the triple win, that is, the fundamental beliefs, the fundamental benefits migration produces within city and nation states, both the sending and receiving, and among the migrants themselves. So what am I arguing? Essentially, the way we talk about or we see migrants, it's like a very narrow frame. You know, they're coming from third world countries, underdeveloped countries. They don't have resources. And because America or Europe, choose whichever developed country. Because these countries are so rich in resources, these poor people have no choice but to come. The sad thing is, though, we are a very myopic people. We don't remember our history. So we don't recognize that Europe has gotten rich off the gold that they took from Central and South America. We're not talking about the bodies that you took from West Africa and then you carted across the Atlantic to the Caribbean because you needed sugar for your tea. We're not talking about how the spice trade moved around the world to facilitate the needs of Europe. If I drive it to the community I'm from, we're not talking about the bauxite that was mined and sent to either America or Canada to then be turned around into aluminum, and we are saying to the Jamaicans, you buy this at a premium price, even though the ore was mined in your backyard. So this history, when we are conversant of this history, we're conversant that the whole economic system. So let me give you an example. So you'll have these trade agreements, and you will say to a small country, have a trade agreement with us, you will be able to export your goods to America, and America can export its goods to your country. But it is unfair from the get-go because whatever Jamaica can export to America has to go through the whole list of approval with the FDA and what is acceptable or not. Whereas when I go back to the community I'm from and I look on the shelves of that supermarket, it is flooded with American products. So the economic system is set up in a particular way that facilitates the good of those who are the developed countries. So when you look at the Caribbean as an example, you're looking at a geographical or regional space that has been, you'd say, formed and fashioned around migration. The only native people to the Caribbean are the Indians who no longer exist. Everybody else who call themselves Jamaican, West Indian, Trinidadian, Bajan, whatever, we are an imported people. That's right. We migrated there either voluntarily or involuntarily, but we weren't originally from there. Yes. So we need to understand that history. We need to understand the way in which slavery shaped or colonization shaped and continues to shape. We need to understand that the Caribbean is America's backyard. America has regional hegemony in that space and that region. So Jamaica can't just do what it wants, or Trinidad can't just do what it wants because it feels like it. It is constrained in whatever it does because the superpower looks down on you and dictates. If America doesn't dictate it, forthright, World Bank and IMF will do for you what America wants done in that country. So when you take all of these things together and you mix it with what I call agency and culture. So sometimes we look at immigrants and we look at them as passive people who just move because they have no choice. That is not true. You have a choice to leave or not. Sometimes it is because of safety issues, but there come a point where you choose to get up and go. So there's no denying the significant role that economics plays, or politics plays, or history, and all of those dynamic plays. However, we cannot dismiss the role that agency plays in migration. In actualizing their agency, potential migrants will access the factors influencing their lives and act according with what was deemed most beneficial for them and their families. The trajectories of their movements were diverse, encompassing intra-island, regional, and also international relocation. So this in turn further developed a culture of migration. So let me take my family as an example. So my aunt is saying, oh Lord. So my grandfather migrated. And he filed for my mom, and my mom filed for myself and my sister. And so while my younger sister and myself were in Jamaica, we knew it was just a matter of time before we left. And that understanding fuels or creates within you this culture of migration. So when you have people sending remittances home, or they're sending, if you don't know what a barrel is, Google it when this lecture is over, sending barrel and goods home. Those things are not just small things. For the relatives back in the Caribbean or Africa or wherever that barrel goes, it becomes a status symbol. You now have access to goods and resources that you didn't have access to before. So when that barrel comes, be it Christmas time, Easter time, or just for the sake of, people in that community look at you differently because you now have somebody abroad. So that process plays into what migration is and what migration continues to be. So it is never this simple, the poor people are coming. We need to keep the ball or the borders, hold the borders against these poor, wretched people. We have to interrogate history, politics, economics, as well as how this all fosters this agency. So one of the assignments I have for my students, I don't see any of my students in here today. One of the assignments I have for my students is that I require them to go to a detention center. Because one way we get out of this mindset of the immigrants are coming, batten down the hatches, the immigrants are coming, is that you hear a story. You form a relationship. And as a result, you realize there is this complexity. Because in the public sphere, you will never get that type of complexity. It doesn't sell papers. It doesn't. Who wants to hear that manifest destiny is one of the reasons why the Central Americans are coming? It doesn't sell a paper. You need to have it framed in a particular way, because then you can fund the things that you want to do. Another thing that I've had students do in the past is visit an immigrant church. I find it surprisingly that a lot of evangelical churches have been praying for many years for revival. Lord, we need revival. The church is dying. We need revitalization. The revitalization may be coming through a Latino Catholic, a Pentecostal, an African Pentecostal, somebody who is not like you. And then the question is, are you open to the revitalization that is at your door? Or will you say, because it does not come in the form I deem it to come, I will negate it and push it aside? That's a question for you to answer. I'll leave it as such. So the other area, my family and I live in Harlem. And if you have visited Harlem in the last 10 years, you will know that Harlem today is not the Harlem of 20 years ago. So the question I have, and one that I will continue to interrogate, I probably should write a paper on it, is life in contested urban spaces. So I say, in numerous neighborhoods in cities across the United States, blocks, stoops, sidewalks, parks, etc. have become contested spaces. Places where tourists, visitors, long-term and recent residents, organizations, and businesses negotiate how and for what purposes these spaces exist. Undergirding this navigation process, however, is the question of belonging. To who does this neighborhood belong? Or in my local question, in my local context, whose Harlem is it anyway? Using words like history, gentrification, displacement, eminent domain, redevelopment, restaurant row, and a trendy hotspot, each group draws their battle lines to quote-unquote protect or enlarge their territory. Living in contested spaces requires the uncovering of how this contestation fits within the historical narrative with the U.S. of occupying space in which others live. I'll read that again. Living in contested spaces requires the uncovering of how this contemporary contestation fits within the historical narrative within the U.S. of occupying space in which others live. It is to acknowledge that many of our cities are products of land taken from native peoples and cultivated by bodies taken from their homeland. It is the cultivation of the ways in which one is either complicit in this process or seeking to be a change agent. So a question I ask is, how does one become a change agent? First, there has to be an awareness of oneself and one's journey that has brought you or brought one to this contested space. It is uncovering the lens through which you see the land. How am I doing on time? Because I know I can talk. I'm fine? Okay. For me, so I start with myself. My lens is as a Jamaican immigrant. Now an American citizen, I fought it for as long as I could. A female scholar and minister, wife to a second-generation Trinidadian man who self-describes as African American, mother to a black boy and girl, 5 and 2 years respectively. Like many immigrants, I primarily, for many years, I'm putting myself out there, I primarily saw the United States through the lens of opportunity, one in which hard work and education would yield the expected results of success and access. However, as my husband and I raise our children in contemporary America, we realize that while this immigrant background can provide them with a sense of heritage and identity, ultimately it will not shield them from the racial realities they will encounter or the potential harm that could be inflicted upon their black bodies, physically, psychologically, emotionally, etc. So my acceptance of these realities and a desire for change serves as a backdrop for this section of the lecture in terms of engaging contested spaces. The second thing is you have to uncover the history of that space, both the macro level and the micro level. So for an example, I'm using New York City. So New York City on the macro level is a global city that exerts a tremendous influence on the rest of the world. Its position as a premier standard bearer both nationally and globally is on display in fashion, advertising, and financial industries, and celebrated in various songs and movies. So if you've heard the song Empire State of Mind with Jay-Z and Alicia Keys, New York City is described as, quote, concrete jungle where dreams are made of. There's nothing you can't do. Now you're in New York. These streets will make you feel brand new. Big lights will inspire you. Hear it from New York. But this inspiration can come at a huge cost to oneself. Yes. For the immigrants, Jay-Z sings, "It's a pity half of y'all won't make it." For the woman, he remarks, "Good girls gone bad. The city's full of them." So while in this hip-hop anthem with an urban syncopation that appeals to the young and the young at heart around the globe, New York is portrayed as the ultimate, a place of endless possibilities where one can begin one's life anew. It can also inflict a life-crushing blow on the lives of many. Yes. On the macro level, so let's shift down to city blocks, be it Mott Haven, be it Harlem, be it Bed-Stuy, be it Brownsville. Do they reveal signs of social neglect? Yes. Local, state, federal, that is systematic poverty and certain fundamental needs go unmet. How safe are the streets? Where do these blocks fall in the mix of changing neighborhoods, systemic socioeconomic disenfranchisement, and segregated affluence? Evidence of what, when Bill de Blasio, our current mayor in New York, when he was doing his first mayoral speech, campaign speech, he says, "A place where too many ways has become a tale of two cities. A place where City Hall has often catered to the interests of the elite rather than the needs of everyday New Yorkers." And many would say even under Bill de Blasio's administration, this may still ring true. So what is the perception of that neighborhood within the larger city? Is it a ghetto or a slum or an upcoming desirable area? We must note that even the designation of ghetto has, you say, policy implications. If we can designate a space as a ghetto, then that means it is prime property for redevelopment. Columbia can come and take it over by eminent domain because an educational facility will do more with the space than the poor people who ghettoize the area will do with it. So this history continues. Robert Moses did it with the Cross Bronx Highway. Others have done it in other cities. So is it this slum? Is it a ghetto? Is it a desirable area like Harlem is now? Or a much sought after neighborhood like Bed-Stuy and other parts of Brooklyn? Each of which has an accompanying image that influences how we interact with the neighborhood, our neighbors, and how we construct life in that space. So how then do you live in the changing neighborhoods of New York City or any other city? Do you stand in solidarity with long-term residents and ponder what their place will be in the redeveloped neighborhood? A lot of times the long-term residents are not even at the table when these conversations are happening. Will the voices of those who have weathered the storms of the bad days be heard now that the better days have come? How much are they a part of the decision-making process? A lot of times they're not there. Or do we stand in solidarity with the recent arrivals? You know what I mean, the new condo owners and the luxury renters, the businesses, artisan shops, and restaurants who see it as their right to own this place and whose presence declare that neighborhood to be safe enough to visit and the proverbial hotspot that everyone now wants a piece of. Entering a contested space is to come to terms with America's history around land and uncover on which side of the fault line one sits. It is to learn the history of eminent domain and how it has and is still used by the powers that be to destroy neighborhoods and concentrate poverty and social ills, which is then used as evidence to criminalize a people while benefiting the rich, connected, and privileged. It is to grapple with how faith speaks to the streets and how one engages the policies that shape the blocks of those streets. It is to appreciate the sacredness of the murals. If you're in any kind of city context, you will see either a picture or with the candles. Appreciate the murals that mourn the loss of another life and to understand what led to that death. In these contested neighborhoods is the invitation to enter the other America, the one that was left behind or marginalized, and be present in that reality. It is to catch a glimpse of how God and good things were present in that neighborhood before you arrived. So my activity is uncover, appreciate, wait, and engage. I won't cover everything. Uncover your story in that space. Cultivate a posture, attitude that enables you, if you're a new resident, to appreciate the neighborhood. Learn the history. After learning, take time to wait. You know, sometimes when new residents with education and money come into a neighborhood, they see it as their right to do, their right to change. It is not your right to do or to change. God has been at work in that neighborhood before you got there. And God will continue to be at work even if you leave. And so how do you learn to see where God is at work, not thinking that it is an invitation for you to join with that work, but to wait to see if there's even the slight possibility that you would be honored to serve with your brothers and sisters in Christ. And that's the discerning together. Ecclesiastical praxis, which is the last one. So, how do you live as a minister in urbanized spaces? So the first section of this paper talks about, in a lot of ways, our interaction with, in terms of ministry, our interaction with spaces, it's in this mind-body dualism that is very rooted in Western philosophy and Western mindset. So I won't bore you with that. I'll just jump to the heart of the expressions and experiences of pastoral life. Because the reality is, regardless of if you function on that high theoretical level, it is your physical body that exists in that space. Yes. So if the gunshots keep you up at night, it bears on either your high blood pressure, your cholesterol, your diabetes. Diabetes is not this fictional or theoretical thing. It has real implications for the cells in your body. Yes. So when I consider ecclesiastical praxis in urbanized spaces, it is very much embodied in the very cells that God has knitted together for us to function in this space. For the urban ministry, all of what I've discovered before, race and the systems, powers and laws that keep things the way they are changed for the better, immigration and the complexity that surrounds it, contested spaces and how one navigates quote-unquote stolen property, and so much more, all converge in the community they serve. How then does one work for God's justice and transformation in spaces that exhibit either the complex layers of oppression that are so insidious and pervasive, or in the normalized and celebration of benefits of complicity with a system built on the oppression of others, or both? So here's my question. You're either in one of three communities. You're in a community where you say the arm of the systems, powers, and structures is very visible. So food deserts, health issues, lack of health care, poor education, that's one. Or you're in a community that has normalized and celebrated the systems, structures, and powers that oppress others. Or you're in the middle that has both at work. So in response to this question, I offer 3 lessons. So this is coming out of my experience of conducting ministry, specifically in Harlem, but in New York City. One of the key things one of the key things an urban minister can do is practice the ministry of presence, vulnerability, and humility to God's people. It is also with our physical bodies that we engage in this holy work. However, this holy work is also slow and hard work. Companioning another in discerning God's work in their life is difficult, regardless of where they fall on the oppression or complicit spectrum. In practicing the ministry of presence, the relationship one builds with God's people cannot be forced or coerced. It takes time and must be mutual, accompanying others and inviting those you serve to be companions to you. However, the practice of presence, vulnerability, and humility in the service of God's people has a dark side. In that you can become so available to people and the demands and responsibilities that accompany ministry that little by little you fail to give time to develop your own spiritual life, nurture your body, or care for one's family. So that's why you have so many PKs don't want to be PKs, because everybody else have access to either their father or mother, and they don't. Awareness of the deceptiveness of this dark side, however, does not inoculate one from the disease, but helps one to be more aware of the symptoms and what they point to. When the dark side is coupled with American cultural assumptions regarding productivity and successfulness, then the work of ministry becomes an idol. And we who engage it in this work are tempted to develop a savior complex. For the urban pastor, this area can be one of ongoing struggle. There's always so many to be present to and so much to do. Recalibrating or dying, that is, with the Spirit of God's help and prompting, one must honestly assess your present condition, naming the idols. This may include that of using God's people for your own gratification. and choosing practices that will continue to cultivate God's life in you and God's people. Second, this savior complex may also extend to a lack of attentiveness to maintaining boundaries, the traverse of which is also detrimental to oneself and one's family. In practicing this discipline, ministry leaders offer an amazing gift to those whom they serve. After all, they too deal with the pressure to succumb to the cultural's definition of productivity and success. And they too struggle with maintaining proper boundaries. In maintaining a boundary, we declare the sacredness of our time, lives, family, and ministry. Thus, part of our witness to a frazzled and stressed out world around us is that in Christ we can have a rhythm that sustains us in all of our life, including our personal, familial, communal, and work. The third lesson I offer in critical reflection on the ministry context and the way it continues to be shaped is a critical reflection on the ministry context and the way it continues to be shaped by Western American culture. For the urban minister who ministers in these spaces marked by oppressive systems and structures, part of their work is to engage structures and systems in the fight for justice. So I say to my students, if all you do in an urban ministry class is theology, you are not equipped for the people you serve. If it is straight Bible, you have not cut it. What do you do with the educational system that is geared towards those kids ending up in prison? When they come to the test scores for the 3rd grade or the 4th grade to determine how many prison beds they're going to need in 10, 15 years' time, what do you say to that mother? What do you say to that father? It is also to develop relationships with organizations in order to truly help those you serve navigate the structures that shape their lives. We have to become more robust in our work. If your work is just in the 4 walls of the church, toll the bell. The door will be closing soon. Who are the advocates in your area? This has to be, justice work requires advocacy work. It requires theological work. It requires sociological work. All of these disciplines need to be brought to bear on these issues because systems and structures and powers covers all of life. For those who are on the other side, for ministers in place of complicity, you too have to engage the powers and the structures in the fight for justice. It is to name the truth for what it is. It is to become a prophetic voice calling God's people out of their complicity to lives marked by true justice and true mercy. So it's not just good enough for us to say, I love justice, I love mercy, I'll write the check and I'll send it to the poor people in the inner city or wherever. We need to critically think about how this system shapes us, how we benefit from it, and how do we ensure that other people do not die as a result of the benefit we so deserve as we see it. So the lessons I've offered are embodied acts that require the health of the urban minister to become a reality. As such, it is important for the urban minister to develop the practice of finding breathing space. I call it here, trees for your soul. You have to find those spaces to breathe, where you know the presence of God in every day. Where in your ministry can you find trees for your soul? The same way the trees clean the air, your soul needs that type of cleaning. Because this work in the work of the church for now, the work of the church for the future, demands that we become multidisciplinary ministers, scholars, who can speak to all of these contexts simultaneously. So I end with these 2 questions. How does the 21st century urban contexts shape the global church? So according to a recent UN report, 68% of the world's population is projected to live in urban areas by 2050. That's not too far from now. So the future global church is an urban church. So if you don't like urban, you have a couple years to ease yourself in, because that's going to be the reality. So in these spaces marked with this complexity, our presentation of the gospel, our living out of the gospel must be robust enough to speak to the realities of lives of people. We have to make the city our classroom, a place of learning and critical engagement. As we work for justice, we do so with the knowledge of our context and the systems and structures and laws that help and or oppress people. This process needs to have two foci: local, national, global, because we're in an interconnected world, and what happens over there impacts us here. The other thing is, the days of the church as we know it is over. Yes. It's a global church. It's no longer from the west to the rest. It is everywhere to everywhere. And so how do we welcome the immigrant, the others, and the lessons that God sends them with? Will we have a listening ear to hear, or will we continue to feel like we are the sole steward of God's work? If that continues to be the way we interact, we should not be surprised when the churches close or they get repurposed for other uses. So what then is the significance? Here's the other question. What then is the significance of partnering with other social agencies, institutions, non-for-profit organizations in conducting ministry that speak to the lived realities in contemporary global cities? The complexity that accompanies the reality of living in urbanized spaces makes it clear that as a church, the days of doing things on her own is over. The issues with which the members in the pew grapple are diverse, complex, multi-layered, and require an input of many disciplines, many of which the leaders in the church do not have expertise. Therefore, in order to adequately serve both the members of the congregation and to seek the transformation of the surrounding community, developing relationships with other social agencies, institutions, non-for-profits is essential. The days of the Lone Ranger is over. If you will not partner with others, it is just a matter of time before you go out of business. So in conclusion, the task of conducting ministry in urbanized spaces that produces the wholeness of people and society has always been a critical one, evidenced by the work of the prophets in the Holy Christian Scriptures in calling the children of Israel back to Torah and what it meant to care for the other, the widow, the poor, the orphan, etc. In our 21st century contexts, the task is very similar and at once complex. In this lecture, I've highlighted some of the distinctive pedagogical issues to consider in teaching, shaping, preparing leaders who make the restoration of wholeness, that is God's work of transformation in people, places, and the world, their primary focus in ministry. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McLean-Farrell, for your passionate and thought-provoking presentation here this afternoon. And now we're going to to yield the floor to Dr. Patrick Milas, who's going to come to us. He's the director of the Gardner Sage Library and also assistant professor of theological bibliography and research, and he's going to come and lead us further in our conversation on urban ministry.
Wow. Since last year, it's been my honor and joy serving with Dr. McLean-Farrell in the Ministry Studies Department here at New Brunswick Seminary. Thank you for your impassioned and erudite and insightful lecture. Our faculty are so excited for the upcoming installation of Dr. McLean-Farrell as the Dirk Romeyn Professor of Metro Urban Ministry. But this afternoon, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing the former Dirk Romeyn Professor of Metro Urban Ministry, who is not only a professor emeritus, but also the intellectual leader in whose honor today's lecture, indeed lecture series, is named, the Reverend Dr. Warren L. Dennis. Dennis served as the Dirk Romeyn Professor of Metro Urban Ministry and Director of Doctoral Ministry at NBTS from 1992 to 2015. He previously served as the Associate Executive for Metropolitan Ministries and Mission for the Presbytery of Detroit, and he was pastor of First and Olivet Presbyterian Church, a multiracial congregation in Wilmington, Delaware, specializing in inner-city ministry in culturally diverse neighborhoods. Today, I also welcome back to campus the Reverend Dr. Bill Levering. Dr. Levering has pastored in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and he is currently the senior pastor of the vibrant congregation of First Reformed Church in Schenectady, New York. He is a graduate of Princeton Theological Seminary, where he received his MDiv, and Temple University, where he received a Ph.D. degree. He's taught at both PTS and Temple as well as Lutheran and ILIF seminaries, the College of New Jersey, and Rutgers University. His ministry transcends faiths and age groups. He's involved in interfaith dialogue and the Boy Scouts of America. Finally, rounding out today's panel is the Reverend Dr. Patricia A. Seeley. Dr. Seeley, or Pastor Pat, as she is commonly known, has pastored the Elim International Fellowship and Mission Network International Ministry. She now pastors the Mott Haven Reformed Church in the Bronx, New York, a member of the Reformed Church in America. Her vision for Mott Haven is that it will become a multicultural, intergenerational church, transforming the lives of the community by the power of the gospel. Her focus is directed on impacting the lives of the next generation of South Bronx residents. She's also founded Manna Ministries International to use Scripture to teach principles related to healthy and holy living amid social issues of social justice and the church. The first respondent will be the Reverend Dr. Dennis, followed by the Reverend Dr. Levering, and finally, the Reverend Dr. Pat Seeley. Please feel free to take the full 5 minutes each to respond, after which I will ask all three respondents and our lecturer to join me at the podium for a question and answer session. Please join me in welcoming our respondents.
I'm counting. Thank you, Dr. Farrell. What an amazing, dynamic presentation. You don't mind if I didn't take enough notes and remember how to respond to you. I want to respond pretty much in your closing, in terms of the pedagogies of the classroom and where I heard and where I did not hear the challenge to this place. Because I think that moving forward in the next 23 years, built upon the 23 years that I was here, that this place is worthy of a continual challenge. And I equate that with the tradition and the non-tradition. The tradition being the theology, the tradition being the church history, the tradition being the Bible that we get here at the seminary that may or may not prepare us for this ministry in the street. And how do we get this place to move to that place with integrity, whereby the classroom in the street, the pedagogy in the street, the classroom in the street is just as honored there as it is here. And what I heard in the dynamic of your presentation that you bring to this position is a scholarship out of your personhood, out of your experience, out of your matriculation, that will validate what persons in the classroom, in the street, would receive, that challenges this place to offer. Not certain. So how then do you help your colleagues to move to that place, and that the location of the classroom is exhibited? Several of my students, former students, are here who are exhibiting that kind of example in location and for classroom. Now, for me, I think that we can move this whole institution to particular locations, either in New York or in Camden, or in Trenton, or in Montclair. These are good places to move South Orange. These are good places from which to reside, to hold a classroom. Now, let me just say that 40 years ago, maybe 50, Paul Henry, Babe West, Jerome Jenkins, Richard Lewis, Holloway C. Sells. These were the disciplines and these were the agency in which Reverend Richard Sellers, the church engaged one another with these agencies and with these disciplines that taught me. The University of Cincinnati Urban Policy and Planning came down to the West End of Cincinnati and began to teach Pookie, that's me, a knucklehead, that's me, how to respect systemic violence perpetrated on the streets, and telling us that it is systemic violence that is the finger of injustice. It's the dark side that you talked about. And so they taught us, and many of them were our teachers, and that curriculum lives in me. But I also think that the curriculum that you talked about will live in those students, the future students that are to emerge from here. So are the students themselves, the students that sit here with us today, or are the students the Jay-Z's and the hip-hoppers of the present? Who are the students that we are to teach in that location, in that place? I don't know if that was mentioned or highlighted, but I think they need to be identified and named. Who are the students? And are they students for the survival of the institution? Or are they students who are for the perpetuation of the ministry in location? Because those are two different student bodies. One for tuition and one for propagation of the ministry in location. And for me, we have to go and get those students on the corner and introduce them to this curriculum that you put forth to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. On behalf of the structures of privilege, I thank you. On behalf of those of us who are in parochial systems, who have a dim awareness that things ought to be a little different, I thank you. On behalf of a lot of churches that need broader perspectives, more cultural critique, and more challenge of diversity, I thank you. I thank the seminary, and I thank you. I want to thank you in particular for the thoughtfulness of your particular presentation and how it brings us to where we ought to be, both in our pedagogy and in some of our ideas about Metropolitan Ministry. I want to thank you for your practicality and for your pedagogical framing. When I went to seminary down the road a little bit, we had a whole separate thing called field education, and the other people were over there, and then there was field education, and they never much talked to each other because the field education, And so I am so heartened to see the integration that you bring with the mind and the ministry, and I look forward to that dramatically. In terms of some of the issues that you raised, I was so heartened to see some of the things that you wrote about in the beginning about adult learners. And I want to say a little bit of yes and. Yes, we have adult learners. And in my experience of some of the adult learners that I had contact with from the seminary, this means that they are entrenched in communities of faith in a different fashion than 18-year-olds. That they come with churches in their back pockets. They go back to churches. And that this is a ripe opportunity that I call in the seminary to exploit in terms of those churches who are sending those people as sort of hopefulness, as sort of an engagement. And how can we bring those churches together for ministry? How can we bring those students and couple up with those churches to understand that it's not just adult learners, but those churches are learning something from this engagement. So I call us to that. I call us to that relationship to a study. I saw appreciation for many of, I come from Schenectady. It's sort of an urban area. It's sort of they call it the Greater Capital District, but it has different issues and different opportunities, because when you talk about contested spaces, I know the guy. I know the guy that I can have lunch with and say, stop doing that. It's a smaller venue, and we might need to talk about how a different scale calls for different sort of gifts. Instead of going to committee meetings, maybe you have to talk to the person and say, stop doing that. And that there is a personal relationship involved, and figuring out who that is and how that works in a different scale of the contested spaces that are still happening. The issues are still happening, just happening in a different sort of way. The final thing I want to bring up is about the collaboration that you say at the very end. And I do want to reinforce how absolutely important I think collaboration with not-for-profits and other agencies is. And I want to go yes and in one more way, and collaboration with other churches. It's not only collaboration with other not-for-profits. It's not only collaboration with government. It's also collaboration with other churches, because, my friends, we all don't need food pantries. Some of us can have food pantries. Some of us can do something else. We need to figure out and have a meeting and say, okay, you're going to do this, I'm going to do that. And we need to sort of collaborate in the way the churches do ministries in urban settings, suburban settings, because we all can't be doing the same things, or shouldn't be doing the same things, because there are so many different needs in the human community. We can do different things better. And I think my time is up. Thank you.
Woo! Can I just say, sister, you preach? I want to thank you for your passion. I want to thank you for your work. I really want to thank you. Just a couple of things as I read your paper and as I heard you speak. And I don't want to make assumptions, so I won't say, oh, I'm sure she wanted to include this but didn't have the time. One of the things that I think it's really important as we are training our seminarians to go out into this world to do whatever God has called them to do, and specifically if it's going to be an urban ministry, is what is your thinking about how we train them or how we facilitate that learning process that helps them to exegete those communities that they're going back to? How is it that we help them to understand the importance of that process and the labor of that process? So I think that's something that I think we always have to keep in mind as we are working with seminarians and they're going out there into our urban communities. I know you did call out Mott Haven, thank you. We are a very, very, very urban community that is impacted by all the vestiges of poverty and poor schools, failing schools, and all of that. And so it's been really important for me and any student that I've had who wanted to do some justice work is that we do that hard work of community-based assets and community assessment and do some ethnographic stuff and looking at what is this community and what are the people, what are the real needs of the people in the community. Because I really don't believe in trying to design something for people without their input and without really knowing what it is that they need and they want, and what will speak to their lives in a way that they want it to speak to their lives. So I think I have just a couple of more minutes. And I do think that this has already been said, but I think for me, it is so important for our students to understand that once they get out there in the pulpit or wherever they are, that you used the word, you can't be a lone ranger, because this is hard work. It's really hard work, and it takes a multiplicity of services and agencies and people coming together. And I see too often that we don't have that collaboration and that working together of our faith leaders to make an impact on our communities. And so I want to thank you. I know my time is up, my 5 minutes is up. But I really want to thank you for the work that you're doing here. And like Dr. D said, and I am one of his students, and he continues to send me reading assignments. But taking the academy out to the street is like really important, especially in this day of ministry work. And so I want to thank you.
Would the respondents please join me and our lecturer at the podium?
I'm sitting down.
Thank you all for your attention, and it's now at the interactive portion. If you'd have a question for one of our respondents or for our lecturer, Dr. McLean-Farrell, please sing out, and we'll get to you.
No, I'm fine.
Yes. How do we get people to
You have no choice. It's really an issue of if you keep doing what you're doing, it's just a matter of time. And so it's saying, how do we be proactive about what our realities are? You can, bemoan the lack of people in the pews and all of those things, or will you shift from that deficit model and say, okay, how do I truly engage this place where I am? So, yeah, you have no choice.
Are we allowed to engage with people who ask the question? To clarify? Because I don't know. You said what people were you talking about?
Exactly.
What people?
Well, just in general, in the context, when it comes to urban, when it comes to gentrification, when it comes to spaces that are just being changed, how do we get people to listen as the pedagogy, as the parishioners now, the leaders in the community? How do we get people to listen?
That's a very different question. I thought you were referring to people like in the church who want to do things the way they've always done it. For that group, you have no choice. In terms of engaging in those communities where you have that gentrification, it's like you're saying, you have to exegete that place. If we're doing ministry in a space, we have to exegete. So you're pulling on sociology. You're pulling on all of these disciplines. So you have their theological framework, but as I said, it has to be much more robust than just a theological framework. You have to recognize that what you see today is a product of all of these things and continues. As last week I was at Samuel Proctor conference and somebody was saying there's no food deserts. It's a food apartheid because a desert is a natural occurrence. Apartheid is something that's structural and systemic. And so we have to know that that is the reality of those neighborhoods. And so it's almost like when you're doing certain term papers and you are going line by line, precept by precept, we need to be doing line by line, precept by precept, finding out where we are, locating yourself. Are you a new person? Are you an old person? Where are you called to be? And if you're a new person coming in, you have to understand this may not be your action to take. Leadership may not be your given default. And you have to come to terms with dying if you're used to leading and making space for others. You're there to help. You're there to accompany. You're there to come alongside, not to be the savior. So it's multiple levels of, you say, stripping, dying, awareness, lens, exegeting, all of those things I would say you'll need to be doing.
I think she gave you the academic answer. Let me just say, from my perspective in my community, you get people to listen when you listen to them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You get people to listen when you form relationships with them. You get people to listen when they understand that you really care, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. that what's impacting them is impacting you as well. You get people to listen when they believe and know that you're willing to walk alongside with them, mm-hmm. and that you're willing to take risk on their behalf.
Another question.
I really appreciate everything that was said today. As a graduate from MBTS, I feel that we need to come outside of the church, as you both stated, as everybody basically had. And the mindset that we have can't be of tradition. It has to be focused on what is in the community. What viable sources do you have to work with? We have to learn how to work together instead of my church is better than your church. And, you know, because it's a large assembly, it means that you have God in it more than anybody else. I think when God gave us gifts, he didn't say, I gave it to a doctor or a lawyer or an Indian chief. He gave it to his people. And we have to recognize that rather than saying that I spend as many years as I do in seminary or wherever my background is from, and I have nothing to contribute to building a unique society, I call it. We have to develop a sisterhood to know who sisters are, what they represent, what they have to give. It goes back to the gifting that God gave us. We always try to look at, well, I have a doctorate, or I have a master's, or I have this and that. But do you have the Holy Spirit? Do you have the anointing to go into that community to do what should be done?
Would anyone like to speak to that point?
I guess the only thing that I would say is that I affirm what you said, and sometimes you have to even go outside of your congregation to find those who are like-minded, have the same passion and compassion, and work with them.
Thank you.
Yes. President Dr. Dennis talking about bringing the seminary to the community. Do you have any models that you could present or some ideas as to how New Brunswick could bring some of these courses to the urban community?
Well, there are two ways to think about that. We can think about it in terms of the agencies and organizations that preceded urban ministry in the academy. We have a long history of action training and action engagement of folks before urban ministry found some legitimacy in the academy. So there are a few models that we can look at for that to take place. I'm at a place now in my life where short-term memory escapes me, so I had something to say, another answer to that question, but
Let me finish it for you. So I'll finish it for him. At New Brunswick, we have, first of all, our certificate program, which allows persons to take classes there, and we have several master's programs. But we've been just approved by the Association of Theological Schools to do hybrid courses, and that's where we can actually have a course where you can do half of it online, and then the professor could come there for the other half. And so looking at that, and we have several sites now already in New York, but we're looking at other sites where we can do that, particularly on Saturdays. And so that's something we're thinking about, staying with Dr. Dennis's tradition as well.
Thank you all for your contribution this afternoon, and to the father of urban ministry, Dr. D, who happened to be a professor of mine, who inspired me to stand downtown at Elijah's Promise, 5 months pregnant, just so I could get in the line to get in and sit down and try to figure out exactly what I was supposed to say to anyone. And that kind of teaching and that kind of passion, from Elijah's Promise to Trenton State Prison, has brought me into the ministry that continues to not only feed my spirit, but feeds the community in trauma and addictions and disabilities. And so for your example and for your passion, when I was here as a student, taking the ministry weekly to the street and asking me particularly, will you make a friend? That was the thing you said to me when I got here. Are you going to make any friends? And that charge has led me to make friends with every agency, every congregation of the 120-odd congregations here in the city of New Brunswick, to know them, to be available to them. And so I thank you for the charge.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it. I was like, to be honest with you, I wasn't going to come like, what are they going to say, that I don't know about. But I'm grateful for your insight, all of your insight. I'm originally from Brownsville, Bed-Stuy. That's my home, born and raised, so I know the plight. My question is, though, before becoming a Christian, I was a Muslim. In God's sake. And I was in a nursing home for 11 months in a Hasidic home in the last 2 years ago. I say that to say this. Where can we establish our Christian community like they do theirs? Where is that? Because can we do that? Is that possible? Is that obtainable for us? That's my question.
Inshallah.
Yeah, I think God has three blessings for us. One blessing comes to all people. There's the blessing of breath, the rain falls on the just and the unjust. I think that God's blessings come to us. The second blessing that God has for us is the blessing of need. God blesses the poor. God blesses the mournful. There are certain blessings that come to us. And I believe the third blessings come from our choices. And there are some choices that bring us certain blessings. And in Christianity, we believe that the blessings to choose Jesus Christ brings us the blessings that Jesus Christ brings us, which we can enumerate. So I think we have a message to the world. We call it the gospel. We call it the good news. Some of it has to do with how God blesses everybody. Some of it has to do with how God particularly blesses people in need. And I believe we cannot avoid the fact that some of the blessings come from some of our choices and choosing Jesus Christ.
Thank you very much for your insightful responses. Thank you for your lecture. Please join me in acknowledging our new Dirk Romeyn.
Thank you, Dr. Miles, and thank you to Dr. Dennis, to Dr. Seeley, and to Dr. Levering for your responses. And also thank you to Dr. McLean-Farrell. At this time, we're coming to a close of our conversation on urban ministry, and we want to bring forth our person for the advancement and our alumni relations. And that's our own Kathy Proctor and Dean Joan Marshall.
Hello, everyone. We're so glad that you're here. It's been a wonderful, wonderful presentation, and we're very thankful. Will all the MBTS alumni please stand up? All MBTS alumni. Wave your hand. You don't stand up again, please. Yes. Wave your hand. All right. Thank you. You are a very distinguished group of people, and you are the fruit of NBTS. And we celebrate what you do in your context, in your communities. We want to take some time and make sure that we connect with you on another level. You may have received a survey recently, and we are asking you to complete that survey. If you haven't received a survey, I have some for you. What we really want to do is we're in two phases. We are developing our alumni relations, which is what we're doing internally, and then we want to establish an alumni association. And so we need all of your input. If you would, you can join us on our MBTS Facebook page, our LinkedIn. We want to connect on many ways because we don't want people just serving as Lone Rangers. We need you. You need us. We're going to be, our plan is to provide you with a great deal of continuing education and connection in a variety of places. So if you would complete this survey, And if you don't have one, raise your hand and I'll hand it to you. And God bless you. We're praying for you.
Thank you, Joan. So if I could just take 1 minute to talk about money. What happened here, this amazing lecture series that didn't happen overnight. Dr. Dennis, we worked hard. We raised money. We raised $30,000 to run this lecture series, which we'll run every year. And that's not one person who gave $30,000. That's this whole room. People were giving. Every dollar counts, and we raised that money. Now, in addition, we would always say, let's increase the money in here. Well, Dr. Dennis, when he first met with our president, I think I have this right, said to the president, what can I do? What can I do for you? What can I do for MBTS? And they came up with the Warren Dennis Scholarship in Metro Urban Ministry. So let's continue. So far, and I think it's only been about 9 months or so far $19,700 and some odd dollars have been raised. The goal is $25,000. So today in this room, I think we can finish a $25,000 fully endowed scholarship, and Dr. Dennis can pass over to our esteemed faculty, Dr. McLean-Farrell, thank you, right there. So she'll have a lecture series and an endowed scholarship. So I ask you all to join today and pray about it, give what you can towards the scholarship. When you leave, there will be a pledge card for you to fill out. Jose will be handing them out. I also have a credit card machine if you want to make a donation. Of course, let's continue this work. And, here we have the lecture. Let's give money back to our students who want to study Metro Urban Ministry. Thank you.
Okay. So this concludes our time together. In your packet that you received, you have an evaluation. We do welcome feedback from you. Dr. McLean-Farrell will welcome if you have any ideas about further programming. So it's in the packets that you received, and there's this evaluation. We'd like for you to fill out that evaluation and give us some feedback on today's presentation, our respondents, and further conversation on issues that pertain to urban ministry. Please fill that out, and you can place it on the table in the back as you're at the registration desk. You can leave your completed copy of your evaluation there. Again, I want to say thank you to all who came. Dr. McLean-Farrell, thank you for that passion, and you preached tonight. You preached. And we want to say thank you to Dr. Dennis. We're grateful to have him back with us again. It's always a pleasure to see him. Dr. Bill Levering, who gladly responded to the invitation, and we're grateful for you. And also Dr. Patricia Seeley, one of our graduates in the D-Min program and studied under Dr. Dennis. Again, we want to thank you again for coming. Please fill out the evaluation. And Dr. Dennis is here, and I was told that many of you who's former students, he'd welcome having a picture with you. If you welcome taking maybe a group picture for our annals and for our Facebook page. All right, so you only if they give that donation. All right. All right, that's a good way. Okay. Are we all set? Okay, so again, this concludes our conversation. Absolutely. Oh, that's right. That's right. Oh, yes. Okay. All right. After this, we're gonna go to Hageman for refreshments. So we'd like for you to join us there. And so I'm gonna ask our dean if you would come, please, Beth, if you come and close us with prayer. This is our dean, Dean Beth Tanner.
And we will remind you, too, that there will be a worship service beginning at 6 o'clock where we will officially install you in your chair. So please, if you are able to stay for that, please do. Join me in prayer, please. Gracious and amazing God, who transcends neighborhoods, cities, state borders, national borders, who calls all of us God's children. Thank you for your gifts to us. Thank you for your daily mercy. And thank you for your enduring love. Bless us in this place. Bless us as we go from this place to the places you have called us to serve you. We are your people. At this time, we ask that you also bless our fellowship, an opportunity to share together, to laugh together, to remember together, and honor old friends and meet new ones. Bless the food and those who prepared it. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.